Okay, so glad to see so many people here curious about dependency injection, which I will talk about. And I thought that I would introduce myself first. My name is Ludwig, and I am a co-founder of this company, MediaTool, which we recently rebooted, meaning by rebooted that we are rewriting the entire application from scratch, and by recently I mean yesterday. So this is a management tool for companies that do advertisement. And the last time we had Node Malmo, we did microservices. So this is more like a macro service, big application, supposed to be able to do many things. And that is mainly what I've been doing for since I left the university, building web applications. And so when we build large applications that consist of a lot of internal modules, how do you keep that together? How do you make them all independent, not depending on each other, so that you can easily swap one if you need to? How do you test them all without being forced to run the entire application to do test? And I'm sure there are many ways, but one of the ways is dependency injection. So how did I end up using dependency injection in JavaScript? I started out as a Java developer, writing backend stuff and so forth, mainly for MediaTool. The current implementation is with a Java backend. Then I learned some jQuery. We had another front-end guy doing mostly front-end, but I got to work a little bit with the browser and stuff like that. We did that for a few years, which is when we came to Angular, and that is around the time when I learned JavaScript for real. And Angular, if you know it or not, introduced dependency injection to me in JavaScript. I had done it before with frameworks like Spring in Java, but this was the first time I saw it in JavaScript. I don't know if there existed other libraries doing dependency injection before in JavaScript, but because of this, Angular also opened up the eyes to me that you could actually build advanced stuff in JavaScript, advanced big applications. That was how I got interested in it. And then I moved on to Node. And I've been working with Node for a while and realized that there was no natural way in Node to do dependency injection. And so for the last 6 months, a little bit more than that, I've been searching for good ways or good libraries to do dependency injection in Node. But to the obvious question on everyone's mind, what is dependency injection? Let's look at an example of a module that does not have dependency injection. Let's say we want to build a module that reads a file, assumes that it is a JSON content, and then parse that JSON content to return an object. So we do it the normal node.js way. We require the file system. This module exports one function that takes the path of the file, and then takes a callback to get the actual object. Then we use the read file function. We do the path. We send in UTF-8, the standard encoding. And then read file will call its callback with error and content, and we just ignore the error because this is just an example. And then we parse that content, and this callback is called with an actual object. So how many dependencies does this module have? Anyone dare to guess? 1. No, it has 2. It has this explicit dependency, and it has the dependency on the JSON, but JSON is a global object, so but it's still dependent on it. How could this be done with dependency injection? If you can see it on the bottom there. Instead of just exporting the function, we export like a factory function where we inject or insert these two things that we need, the file system and the JSON thing. And then we return this function that is exactly the same as above. And the difference here is that the module itself is not at all responsible for getting its external dependencies. That job is put on the code that uses the module instead. So the code that uses this module could actually inject anything it wants to. It of course needs to make sure that it is usable. But really all it needs to make sure is that the stuff that is sent in can do this stuff, can read file and can parse. What's the why do we want this? Well, let's say we want to test this function. How would we have to do that if we did not use dependency injection? If we were, if we explicitly, like in this case, use the file system available in Node and the global JSON object. The only thing we could test this would be to actually have a file with actual JSON content that was valid, and then we could supply the path to that file and test, and we could check that what we get in our callback is the expected actual object. But what I can do here instead in my test, when I have this dependency injection version, is that I can create a fake file system that only has one function called read file. And what this function does instead is that it takes a path, and then it calls the callbacks with a string content of this path. Now I realize that I forgot the error here, but perhaps you get the idea. And the fake JSON has a function called parse, and it gets a string, and all it does is it returns that the string parsed. So now I can do the test on the bottom here, where I call the factory with a fake file system and the fake JSON, and then I parse some file, and what the callback should give me is content of some file parsed. This makes the module completely decoupled from the actual file system, the actual JSON object, and makes it easy to test, which leads to other stuff like portability. You can usually, if you write modules this way, you can usually you can easily reuse them or make them very, very small. Like if you have a utility function, you can just insert that into other modules and to create more modular code that can be reused. Okay, so let's see. What if I want to use dependency injection in Node? What kind of options do I have? So the Angular dependency injection module is actually available in Node. And if you're familiar with Angular, if you've used it, you can do that. Although I've never tested it, I don't think it's very heavily worked on. And I know there has been some issues with it. And what I really don't like about this thing is that when you create modules in Node, we have a common way of doing it. We have the modules.export object, and we have ways to require. But if I want to use Angular's dependency injector, how many people here are familiar with it or have used it? Very few. Okay, but the point of it is that it forces you to put the Angular dependency injection module into your code, which makes your code totally dependent on that module. And that wouldn't be very good if I work on a project for some time and then realize that there are some features here that I don't want to use. And there are very many other dependency injection modules in Node that has this same problem. They leave a very clear imprint on your code, which is not a good thing for a library, I think. I found this one called Node Dependency Injection. This one had a different take on it. It doesn't leave an imprint on your code, and you wrap your module together through configuration instead. But I also found some other problems with it. It relied too heavily on it wasn't usable in the browser. I think it was very hard to get it to work in the browser, so I didn't like it. There are many others. Some people, when you talk about this, say, "What about require.js? Are people here familiar with require.js?" Only a few. Which require.js looks very similar to Angular. You say, "This is my module," give it a name, and then you have a list of dependencies, names of dependencies that you get, and then you have a callback function. And you get those dependencies into your module, and then you can have other modules depend on that module. But require.js is not a dependency injection framework. It is a file and module loader. So its responsibility is to make other files available to your code. Load the files and make the code available. And this so the message here is module loading is not dependency injection. So here we have a commonly written module in Node. It requires my dependency, and then it exports a function where it can do stuff, and it can use the dependency. And require.js, in require.js, it would look like this. You define it, you say, this is the dependency I want, and here you get it, and you can use it. But it's only good for loading files. Like in both these two common examples, we have the notion that a module is a file. It explicitly says in the Node documentation, if you read it, that in Node.js, a file and a module is the same thing, kind of. There is one module per file, and a module is only defined in one single file. So I was looking around trying some different libraries, but I didn't find anyone that I was totally happy with. I can be rather picky about this stuff. So I said that this is what I want. I want a dependency injection system that has minimum impact on your code. It should not require more configuration than what is necessary. It should not know what environment it is in. It should work in Node, should work in the browser. Which is the last point here. And so I asked myself, how hard can this be? And I mean, it was an open question. Like, how hard can it be to write a module like this? Is it easy or is it extremely difficult? And over the course of 2 evenings and a few glasses of wine, I wrote a module column end in what I say here, 50 plus 50 lines of code. why I say 50 plus 50 is because I split them. There are two main components in this, and one is the container, which has all your modules registered into it, and that can instantiate them with dependencies from other modules. And the other 50 lines, so that part is completely environment agnostic. Doesn't know anything about the environment. It just knows that it has modules and you can get them out. And the other 50 lines is a node.js utility that loads your that takes in a configuration object and requires the modules in the node way. So if we want to add support for the browser, you can use this today in the browser using Browserify, which is a module that takes your node code and makes it work in the browser. But if someone wants to add support for another module loader like require.js or the true vanilla way of doing it in the browser where you just do global things, then maybe they could add that with another 50 lines of code. So how do you write your stuff using Amend? There are three different types of modules you can create. First one is a factory. This is inspired by Angular, but a little different. So how to do it in Node is to create just export one single thing from your module, and it needs to be a function for a factory. And this function can take dependencies in. And then you can return whatever from your factory. So you can return another function, or you can return an object, or a constructor, whatever you want. And that code can use the dependencies. Second thing is a value, which also can be anything. Can be a function, or can be an object, or anything. But it cannot have dependencies. And the last thing is a class. And the class is very similar to the factory, just that it will be instantiated with a new operator. So you can assign stuff to this, and whatever it will work like a constructor, where the dependencies are sent into the constructor. And so if I wanted to use this, I create the configuration, where I name my modules. I say whatever is called, my factory is required on this path, which is where the file is located, and my value is located on this path, and my class is located on this path. And here you have to say explicitly that it is a class, because you can also explicitly say that it is a factory or that it is a value, but Amend is a little bit smart. So it looks, if you don't say what type it is explicitly, it looks, if it is a function, then it assumes that it is a factory, and if it's not a function, then it assumes that it is a value. But a class or a constructor is also a function, so there would be there's no way to distinguish them by just looking at the what's returned. So here you have to say that it is a class. And so here we have these three modules: my factory, my value, my class. And you could easily you could inject those here if you wanted. So if you want the class to be dependent on the factory, then you just say it here. You just put the name in here. And you, when you require this class, it will be called with the dependency of the factory. And that was all the slides I had, but I also have a lovely little example here. And okay, Wim, put to the test. How can I do this? Anyone know how I can scroll to the to the left? Well, I have some other code here, but I can't. Never mind. I'll do it like this instead. I'll fix it like this instead. We have a little dice game here. That might be the next big thing. It works like this. You run it. It rolls a dice between 1 and 6, and if it's an even, then you win. If it's odd, then you lose. That's the game. So we need a function to roll the dice. And here I've decided to use Lodash because Lodash has a nice random function that I can just pass in 2 numbers, and it gives me something between them. So I like that. So this is a factory. It has a dependency, which is a node module, and it returns a function that you call, and that function call will give you something between 1 and 6. Then I have another module that determines the outcome of the game. And that depends on the previous module, roll dice. So this is also a factory, and it returns a function that will do the roll. And it will give you a message, if it's even, you won, else, ouch. And then the roll was whatever it was. And if we look at the main file, here we require the amend library. And then here's my configuration, my modules, the thing called, the underscore. I require it like this, Lodash, and it needs to be a value because Lodash is actually a function, but we don't want to call that function like a factory, so I'll say this value. And the roll dice is the roll dice file, and the determine outcome is the determine outcome file. That's my setup. I create my dependency injector like this. Amend, from config, I pass in this configuration object and the base path where I'm running from. And then all I need to do is require the determine outcome module, which I do like this, the dependency injection.get with a name. And now this determine outcome file will be instantiated with the proper dependencies injected. So this will be created with roll dice injected, and roll dice will be created with Lodash injected into it. And then we log the message. So now we can play this game. Lost. Ooh, it's not my night tonight. Oh. So that's a very basic example of modules depending on other modules, depending on other modules. And this is my take on how I, would like a dependency injection framework to be created, or how it should be designed. It can be used. It's still under development. It's pretty alpha so far. Or rather, I have. I think that the container that has all the modules works pretty well. But what hasn't been tested that much yet is the kind of workflow you have when you want to, if you want to make this able to function in the browser, then you can do that with Browserify, and you can also minify your code, which is a problem with injecting values because it checks the names of the injected values, and when you minify your code, those will go away. But there is also a solution for that. However, it works, but the full process of making it work in your daily workflow is not truly complete. But I would very much like people to try it out, see if they like it, and send me issues on GitHub. So that was, yes, this is my take on dependency injection, how it could work in Node, and also this was I think the first module I wrote and published on npm, and I was really amazed at how easy it was to make this stuff work in Node, to make the like recursive lookup from dependencies to dependencies, 50 lines of code for that stuff, which is basically the essence of the module. It was it's very nice. So if you have bigger projects, I encourage you to first try dependency injection. Second of all, try this and give me feedback. Any questions?
So you use dependency injection primarily for unit testing there?
Yeah, so the main, what dependency injection gives you is that you can use the same module, but you can like inject it with different stuff at different times if you want to. That's mainly used for unit testing. I think that's a very clear case where you want to swap out what you actually put into it. But there is also the case that like when we're going to build a media tool, we're just starting out. We have not decided on a database yet. Which database should we use for what? There's always something that may be changing, will be changing. So what we do is that we will like create an internal interface for database modules to have, and then we might write a MongoDB module that has all the functions in that interface, and we can use it. If we then decide that we maybe want to use something else, maybe want to use a graph database or Redis or something, then we can just write another module that works against Redis and has the exact same methods, and we can inject that instead. So it can be very easy to swap out dependencies, and not so, which means that you will not lock yourself in with one a decision you make early on for some kind of reasoning. I don't know if you saw, there was a video series or discussion on YouTube, I think it was this spring, between DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails, and Martin Fowler and Kent Beck. Kent Beck, who is the creator of JUnit. It was called "Is TDD Dead?" DHH was kind of post dependency, unit testing, and they were also talking a little bit about dependency injection and making it easy to swap out your modules. And they mentioned this about swapping out the database, and I think he was like, swapping out your database. When do you do that? And my take on it is like, if you could swap out your database like that, or easily enough, then wouldn't you do it? Because when we started out, we did MySQL, and that was good enough then, but there are so much better alternatives these days. So if you want to make a long-lived application, if you plan for it to work for more than a year, perhaps you want it to make a business 10, 20, 50 years, then I think it's a good plan to make sure that you don't lock yourself in with certain dependencies.